So I'm going to spotlight that video, so you should be able to see that one just fine. And I'm going to drag my, ooh, yeah, we'll drag it over to about here so that I can look back and see mess with anything. So we are, I've got a whole bunch of stuff that I grabbed from my house that I figure normal people would be fairly likely to have at their house. And I'm going to go over with different ways to make tools, and particularly have some information on stamps. It's one of the options you have for making tools. It's more of a signature stamp. Is more something that artists will do, particularly potters. It's kind of part of the, I think they're called like a chalk in the Japanese, and it's a symbol, like a single symbol. You know, my version of that was my initials done like this as a stamp. I usually don't stamp it because I made this kind of big. And if I press this into the bottom of one of my pots, where I usually put this symbol, it dents it too far. However, in my sculptures, when I've got the bottom all smoothed out, and I'll go and I'll pop that into the bottom somewhere. But I usually want something smaller if it's going to be anywhere more visible. And I haven't made a smaller version of this. I tried it a couple of different times in a couple of different ways. You know, this is a version of the same general thing. But I'll show you some of the ways that I made that, and then some of the other stamps that I made and what went well or not as well with them, depending. But mostly we're going to look for various tools that you can use for various things that you can find around your house. So you should have access to your toolkit, but you know, like there's the scoring tools. You can grab a fork and, you know, score very quickly with a fork. The sharper the tines, the better, but it works pretty much all of the time. And then often your silverware will have interesting shapes on the back. Actually, the simpler the shape, the more useful they are as a tool. You know, like doing a face in something, and so you know, kind of going there, going there. Giving some nostrils. Bit of nasolabial fold going on. And, you know, you can, I don't know, flip it and do a thinner edge. And then get that little divot in the lip, right? You know, like it's got quite a bit of potential for just a random, like I said, these are all things that I found at my house. There's lots of different ways that you can make textures. Of course, there's, you know, like line work you can do with this, and it can actually be pretty interesting to do, you know, overlapping lines that kind of wave. You can do if you've got screwdrivers around, and I grabbed a set of bits from my house, and like you've got different ways that you can use the different bits to make different markings. And then for like a decorative line thing, one of my favorites is just a flat screwdriver, and I used a little bit before, but you couldn't see. So like you've got a straight line, straightish anyway, and then you want to make like a zigzag pattern, and you can kind of measure those to be about the same that way, and then you can like you can even come in and put a little mark there. And this clay is quite soft, but the screwdrivers will make marks in pretty stiff clay, and the pressing means that you don't get the little goobers that you get at various stages of using the clay. But you can get nice even marks, and they're all the same length. And the press, like I said, it means you don't get your little goober lines from trying to draw a zigzag pattern, right? Much cleaner look. You can kind of lightly draw things out first and then use that to press, and that kind of a thing. When it comes to the tools in your kit, the trimming tool, I don't like for carving. It has a tendency to catch, and it makes it kind of bounce. So I don't have any in hand, but you try and carve a notch, and it tends to catch and jump, and it makes it uneven that way. So I prefer a wire loop rather than a ribbon. So any direction you pull at it, it goes. And paper clips are great for that. You can just take a paper clip and kind of, open it up. And if you want, you can just kind of use it like that. You've got a small end or a larger end. If you take half of it and you just get a pencil or some other kind of stick, and that's just regular tape. I didn't use good tape because I wanted to, show you that you can improvise it with just about anything. If you want a really sharp line, you can take a staple, just like a single staple, and bend it and kind of stab it into the end of a pencil. And they'll make for, much more interesting mark making and carving. Like you want to go and you've got a line like that. You want to make it a little more three-dimensional, so you make it carved down on one side, and then you fade that out on the other, so that it's a carving on one, it's got a line on the other one, and the other side fades, which is ways that you make effects kind of like this, where you've got, we've got different layers, but they all, like this, and all of these are all up to the same height. So, like I carved back that line a little bit, and then I faded it out. You could use, this to kind of smooth across there. You can bend a paper clip, use a staple or bend a paper clip to get those little finer lines in there, and all that kind of a thing. And then this one's painted. It's bisque fired, but this is a painted finish. And of course, there's the colored wax that do the bronze part, and that bronze stuff that you're gonna have access to that at home, either unless you're happy to go to a craft store and spend kind of a lot and get rub and buff, that wax finish stuff. But there's a lot of painting options that you have. If you do have some paints, including some metallics or whatever, you can give it the faux bronze effect. But there's all sorts of painting options that are good. You can use a pen, pull things apart. I used the handle of a broken thing, and I actually pulled this pen apart, and I used this little dealio to put the wires through, and then I shoved it on the outside of a thing, and it made a tool that I wasn't sure how long it would last, but I've had it for, I don't know, 6 years, and it still hasn't broken. I used it on a broken needle tool handle, but it could be pretty much anything else. And I bent wire into various shapes. So you can get that much. These little skewer things, they're useful for various things. Really, I think this point is too sharp. I don't like making marks with anything very sharp like the needle tool. I always prefer using a hook tool or something else, but you can dull it by sanding it down if you don't have sandpaper, but you've got a driveway or sidewalk near your house. You just scrub it across that, and it sands it really well. You can do the same thing with popsicle sticks, sharpen them, change them into whatever shape you want. And then you can see, like you can make various textures just by pressing them and make a pattern. To do like a scale pattern or a reverse scale pattern. You can even shave it down into the opposite curve, and then it'll make the scales raised up, but that has a similar effect. And you can use a screwdriver to go in, and you can make the opposite pattern. Make a pattern like that, or you can even kind of use it to make like a shingle, that squared thing. So you drop this whole edge, and then you come down a little bit, and you drop this edge, and then give it some dividers. That sort of a thing. So you've got that. And again, it's going to look a little different when you use it. You have a metal rib and a wooden rib in your toolkit, but a rubber rib or a plastic rib are often useful credit cards. And this is not an active credit card. It's not even an active Maverick card. That they give these out for free anytime you want to go grab one. It just says take one. So I went and took one, and really good for smoothing. And you can hold it at enough of an angle. If you kind of curve your rib like this, it'll scrape stuff off, and then you pull it like that, and it'll smooth. If you just lay it across like this, it just smooths and compresses. And you can cut it into whatever shape you want. You can even make it serrated. So you cut it with scissors at angles, and it makes marks that will be, so you can use it a little more like these tools, and these ones with a little bit of irregularity in the spacing, which is nice because that's what happens when you cut it with scissors generally. It makes for a good bark texture. You kind of do some irregularity and have them come down, and you can make it a bit rough or a bit smoother depending on the type of bark you're trying to do, but you do a little bit of that irregularity and overlapping, and you get decent bark texture. If you're making some sort of a tree-like thing. Let's see. I made this with hot glue on just this was it's a wooden doll head thing I just had, but you could glue it onto whatever. And depending on the hot glue pattern, will depend on the texture that it puts on there, but that's kind of an interesting texture. When it comes to textures, I've bought these texture rollers that are of a sphere, and they're cool because they don't have seams, and so when you roll it across the surface, you can just change direction anytime you feel like, and there's no particular seam. However, they have limitations. One of the biggest limitations is, say I'm trying to texture something that's got some shape like this, and I want to roll this across to that edge. I can't get all the way to the edge, and so I'll have to take it if it gets too close to the edge. So when I made mine, I made it like a stamp. It's still got a curve, so I can get that kind of seamless rolling effect, but I can also push it right into corners and get mine go anywhere across there. When you're doing a texture stamp, you need to kind of think opposite of the effect you want. So if you want little bumps to look like pebbles or lizard skin, which is what I was going for with this one, and I'm thinking about making another one with, it'll be a variation on the same thing, maybe with some smaller holes, but I still want those holes to be irregular. And so I took just the end of a paintbrush handle, and I'm kind of spacing them out a little bit weird, but to a certain extent, they're all getting, they're getting big. I might go even smaller. The smaller they are, the more I have to mess with them. But I want them to be irregularly spaced. And then importantly, you can't really see it very well, but all of the lines that are supposed to press into something, they need to be shaped kind of like this. So if this is a single line, and I'm making this a little bit exaggerated so that you can see it. So it's a single line that's length there. If you look at it in profile, so that's the line. And if I want it to have nice sharp edges, I can make those hard lines right here. There we go. Those sharp lines right there. But then as I it needs to get wider as I go back. In particular, it can't have any undercuts like this, where it's undercut just a little bit on the one side, because that will tend, you push it into the clay is soft enough, it'll fill in some of that, and then when you pull it out, it will drag up that edge a little bit. And I can probably show you that with this. This is a stamp I've been working on. I haven't fixed the undercut issue yet. And it either won't grab very well, or it will leave that a little bit messy there. That's not, oh yeah, you can see it right there where it kind of, come on, focus. You can see it right there where it caught up that edge and pulled it up a little bit. I'm working on, this stamp. I found some negatives at one point that had been cut out. So they cut out the little Christmas trees, and this was the throwaway sheet, but it had all of the cool spirals in it, just the reverse of what they were using on the other thing. And so I used these to make a few different little spiral things. So, you just press that into clay and then it's a stamp. But if you press it into clay as it is, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And, the wood actually works just fine, but like that one's too fragile. And I wanted to try the inverse as well. So I made some that are stamped, but I'm going to have to clean up those edges just a little bit, and then I will fire it. It's also nice that it has a little bit of a curve, because as you press down, you want it to hit the center first, and then press out to the edges. That way, because you can always rock it like this to get the edges down, but you have to just push the whole thing down to get the center. And so it's nice for it to have a curve. Here's an example. I sanded this just random piece of wood to have a curve, and I did that stamp with a solder iron. Some of you guys have those at home, some don't. But if you do, and you have little pieces of wood and a sander, then you can do this out of wood. Like I said, you can do it out of clay. Here's the same stamp. Whoop, not that one. Somewhere here is the same stamp made out of clay, or at least the same star pattern, but this one has a circle. I just didn't get that very clean, the lines in that very clean, and so I should have done a little more when the clay was a little more dry, to get those edges crisped up. Sometimes it's also good it takes forever to sand away at it when it's bisque fired, but you can do some cleaning up with it once it's bisque fired as well. So same sort of a stamp. This one, you can see it works better with some softer clay. You can also, with stamps like this, push some clay into it. If you're trying to attach it to something that's a little stiffer and it's not pushing in, so it's making the image kind of muddy like that, not going in and making those sharper images, you get it there and you pop it free and it makes a much cleaner image, but it pulls the clay out. And that's how I do these I made these stamps for nuts and bolts and screws. So you push the clay in there, and it's important when you push the clay in that you don't have any wrinkles on that part, but then you just get a little bit of water, work it into a little bit of slip, and then you press it onto the surface, and now it's a bolt on that surface, right? Same thing with the screw head. You can see, maybe if it will focus. There it is. Yeah, you can see it's a screw head with a like the little Phillips thing, except it looks like it's stripped out because the clay didn't go clear down inside of the thing, so I could have made another one and make it better, and may still make another one and make it better, but same thing, go on here, and you can make it look like your project was screwed together. You also can just put a little blob on there if you want to do them individually. Put a little blob on and just chunk, and now it looks just like a screw. Yeah, there's that. Or if you wanted to change it and make it look more, I want it to be a star bit instead. Oh, hey, look, now it is. So there's those that you can use to make your stamps. When you make slab projects, sometimes they're kind of boxy, and it's fun to make them look like they were bolted or riveted together, and those are some ways that you can do that. And it really is, I just found a bolt and got the clay ready and kind of shoved it over the top, then I cleaned up the edges. Yeah, if you want to do something a little more like this, or you have a design, like this tri-spiral thing that I tried to make look nice, and it looks okay, but it can be tricky. I'm very interested in the Celtic designs. I think they're beautiful. I think they're complex and repeating. They have nice symbols, and it's where my ancestors are from. And so, Celtic symbols are cool, but they're complicated and kind of take forever. And so you try and do one of those, and you spend quite a bit of time doing some subtle carving. This is an example of one. I push it in something or other that has some paint on it. But this is one I just kind of freehand carved, and it doesn't have the edges that I wanted it to have. Those edges don't show up the way I want them to. And so I'm still working on better ways to get that to work. Larger scale, I know I can do it, and I've done it. You know, I made these Celtic symbols here. With this is IHS, and so you know you carve down a little bit there and carve down a little bit, and this is all clay pressed into a mold. But this was an expensive silicone mold that I made, and I made a mold of just this separate from the entire thing, and I made a mold of a little section of this, and then I made a few of these little things and actually put like ball bearings in between the clay. And then I made a little mold of that, and then I pressed clay into that mold and repeated that pattern all the way around. These, I think I just freehanded. Or maybe I made a mold to have the two that matched. I can't remember, it's been a long time. But these Celtic designs are cool, but you know, trying at this size, I can do them. Trying to go much smaller than that, it's really challenging. And so like for a little chalk symbol, something that I would poke into the outside, you want them to be about, you know, yay big. And they're just, the stuff I've made is too big. This is another one, like me trying to do that Celtic knot, and it works okay, but it's still just a little bit bigger than I want it to be. And you can, you know, make a stamp of this one, use that to make a stamp, and each time you fire it and let it dry, it shrinks and shrink them that way. But they also lose some clarity every time you transfer them. And so you'd have to recarve each one to be a little more clear, which may be worth doing. So say I want to draw out a design, like I'm just going to do, just for my last name, just a W, and just to make it simple. So I'm going to figure out where I want that W to go, because it's going to be straight lines. I'm going to use a tool that does straight lines, right? That screwdriver. And so I'll do the outside edge first. And I want that to be, so in here, I'm going to have it come up just a little bit in the middle, maybe a little steeper. Come up to there. And then somewhere in there. So that's the outside of it. Maybe I'll make the W, actually. It would be fun. I might at some point make a W that looks like a bird. I like birds. They have interesting symbolism and whatnot, and then it can have a W for Wainwright. That'd be fun. But for now, I'm just going to do the W. So we go up to right there, and then I'm going to go in right there, and I'm pressing and or carving that away, partly depending on the hardness of the thing. Let me see if I can get this camera down a bit. That way it'll stop losing focus. Grab a chair and sit. But pushing down here. And now I've got that W. Now the downside of doing this when it's soft is also bumping the table. Downside of doing it when it's soft is that it's harder to get those sharp lines. The plus side is I can just kind of pull with my fingers to get this to go away, so that when I stamp it, like, you know, this one, you know, some of these others, when I stamped them, you can see the outer shape in there instead of just the marks. So I can pull that clay away easily, and you know, where I can't pull it away easily, I can carve it away with various tools. Paperclip. And say I realized that, wow, I was trying to make this small and it's kind of big. Maybe if I squish it in a little bit, change the angles up a little, and then I can go back in and clean up those lines, make sure they're at the right angle here. And if I'm making the top edge, if it's curving on me too much, I can wait for that to dry and stiffen up. And with stamps, it's really easy to let them dry and stiffen up because they're so small. They dry pretty quickly. But I've got a stamp something like that. I have it go wider so it doesn't break very easily, but all of this clay, this is all unnecessary. I just need enough to hold on to it. So I'm gonna take off all that clay, bring it into, reasonably small little stick looking thing, and then have it go just a bit fatter at the end so that I can grip it. And you can make this really pretty. And you don't necessarily need to. You should at least make it smooth. It makes it a lot easier to see where the mark is going to be. You've just got this random blob of crap. When you go to push the stamp down, you don't know which way to turn it. Where this one, you can see pretty clearly where that mark is. And then I'll go in with my needle tool or, again, handy paper clip and kind of cut at the sides this way. I made those outer lines thinner, so I'm going to make these inner lines thinner. Push that in there a little bit more. So I've got, little W stamp. A little bit Wonder Woman looking, but, I can come up with something else. But if it's just going to be like your initials, you kind of draw them out or, trace the outside. But if it's not a symmetrical thing, make sure that it's in reverse because you're going to get a mirror image. The first time I made one of these stamps, this is not a mirror image, my BLW thing. I did it forward, BLW, and I got it all finished before I realized it was backwards. And when I stamped it, it was the reverse, and that made me feel kind of stupid. So spare yourselves that and remember to do the reverse. And yeah, it would be a really good idea for all of you in sculpture class. I'd like to make it an assignment to find and or make a texture tool, something that makes cool and interesting textures. Have you find it and take pictures of the tool, or make the stamp and take pictures of you making the stamp, and then take pictures of the textures that you can create with it. Especially if you could show us, like the texture it makes when it's soft and when it's stiffer. And then, when you bring those, you could bring in the stamps, and those can be used as part of the classroom set, or you can keep them if you really like them. I've got some that I really like enough that I keep, and some that I like reasonably well, but they're part of just the classroom set because this was pretty easy to make. But it's really fun. And I don't do a lot of geometric steampunk type stuff, but mechanical making. Oh yeah, a couple of other things that I forgot. I got to the scoring tool. The spoon is of course a good burnishing tool. Smoothing, I got to the credit card, but a lot of you guys have spatulas that are rubber, and most of them you can pull the heads right off, and then you've got a really nice rubber rib. Even like cheapy Elsa spatula that one of my daughters got for something or other, and it's a pretty good. It really is a pretty nice rubber rib, like It's got enough firmness to smooth when the clay needs it, and enough softness to make sure that the surface is that really smooth, rubber rib smooth kind of a surface. That semi-burnishing dealio. And you can also often use the sticks for similar things. So, yeah. Are there any questions?
Can I pick up my clay today?
Yes.
Okay.
I'll be here till 3 at least. If it's going to be after that, let me know and I can leave it on the loading dock. Here was another one, hot glue. I talked about hot glue as a texture thing, but you can also just put it on a stick, and you've got those little rubber blenders and rubber sculpting tools that you can. Oh, I don't really like the shape, so you go and you get a knife and cut off a little bit, sharpen it up, go and heat it over your stove for a second, soften it back up, change the shape, stick it into the water to get it hard, and back over by the stove to get it soft as you mess with it. So the rubber blenders, and those are just on a little stick, one of those skewer sticks. Because a lot of you guys have hot glue at home. Most people have reason to use hot glue at some point in their life, and then they just don't ever throw the hot glue gun away. But this is one somebody just sat there forever and just went over with a palette knife, is what they were using, but they just kind of went forever because they were bored. And so I saved it. It was just left out, and I saved it, and it makes a pretty cool texture. Makes more of a bark looking texture as stamped than it does, but I mean, it's cool looking by itself as well. So yeah. Any other questions?
So are we still gonna do the fantasy art project?
So the fantasy art, here, let me pin the spotlight on that one. And I'm gonna go ahead and stop the recording.